Because the movie spans so much time, is there sort of a certain point in the story that you feel like is most formative in terms of you developing the character, like some moment, whether it's when they first meet, whether it's sort of her actualization of herself as an older woman. I mean, that you feel like is sort of most fundamental to the core of the character that helps you sort of define who she is through the course of the movie.
Well, I think the scene where she finally agrees to go for lunch with him after 2 years of courtship, when she's been dealing with a married man who's been sending her flowers once a fortnight from Montreal to New York, and she's obviously been quite taken with the crazy gesture of him chasing her onto a train on his wedding day. But she's deeply suspicious of any man who is a cheat because of what her father did. And I think the moment after she meets him for lunch, he's clearly drunk. He has to leave the table to go and be sick. He then passes out on the bed. And she's up in his hotel room. It's not actually really shot, but I imagine during that time she sort of looked around the room and she saw all his ties laid out and all his shirts, and she found the crib notes that he'd written for topics of conversation. And I think at that point she realizes that this guy is not the sort of arrogant schmuck that she thought, that he's actually, incredibly nervous and not nearly as cocky as she thought, and has obviously, really built himself up for this moment. And she's special. He's not doing this to every other woman. And I think it's that realization that makes her stay. And that's what flips her. So for me, it's that. But that's maybe not what you're expecting.
No. Well, do you find that, I don't know if it's in this case or in general, that you would say take your cues from, in this case, the novel? Do you take it from the script? Is it dealing with the other actor? Or, getting on set and sort of seeing all that stuff and that sort of helping you sort of figure out those sorts of moments? I mean, is it pretty well defined in the script? Was it maybe more detailed in the book? And
he's talking about it. We actually had a rare opportunity to rehearse with this film, because we went to Montreal for maybe a month before filming started, Paul and I, and we had about a week, and we did obviously the prosthetics tests, and we rehearsed a lot, and we because a lot of the shots are done in two shot, they're not intercut, so it was a great opportunity to sort of treat it like a piece of theatre in a way. So I think some of those things came out of those kind of conversations. Certainly I remember very clearly rehearsing the scene where he confesses his infidelity, which is another turning point, and it's a point where after this great love that you've seen between these two, the audience probably expects her to forgive him. And she doesn't, because to do so would be to go back on the one thing that kind of has anchored her all her life, is this is my breaking point. This is the line. This is where you don't cross, and he crosses it. So she has to, in order to stay true to herself, she has to go, And that's another, that's another key moment.
Because a book, obviously you can't bring every scene or every aspect of a book to the screen.
Yeah.
At what point do you make yourself beholden to sort of the original text to either inform the character, and then what point do you say, we'll never be able to deal with this,
I'm always sort of wishing you could deal with it. I'm always referring to it. That's just the way I operate, and suddenly but it can lead you up the wrong tree. You can want something, you can want a line from the book that's really kind of good and witty, but actually sort of skews the balance of a scene the wrong way. That script was worked and worked and worked, and was a very sort of carefully poised piece of work in its own right by the time we came to shoot it. So usually every time I came up and said, "Oh, Michael," or he was the writer or the director, "Do you know I could say this?" Usually the answer was no. And Paul and I, for instance, during that scene where he's drunk, Paul and I both wanted Miriam to say, in the script she says, "Are you okay? Is everything all right?" And I wanted her to say, "Barney, are you drunk?" Because I think that's what Miriam in the book would say. But I think at that point, they felt that would be too harsh for her to be so direct. They wanted her to be understanding and caring, but in a more, permissive way, right? But, so that was, and I just thought it was funnier for her to say, "Are you drunk?"
No, absolutely.
But, to give her a bit more bite, because sometimes I wish, Miriam had a bit more bite, but then in the end, it's Barney's version. You know, that is why that's the film's title, and that's the sort of raison d'etre of the whole piece. You know, it's life seen through his eyes, his own life seen through his own eyes. So Miriam is sort of maybe a little bit, more sweet than she perhaps was, or more perfect, or whatever.
Well, you talk about the idea that when she goes for that lunch, that originally she kind of has this idea that he's this arrogant, guy. How do you look? For example, but at the same time, like in between when he first meets her and when he finally gets to take her out, I mean, there's no real discussion of like any other people that she's dating or whatever. And how much like sort of external life to the film did you have to sort of think about? Because I mean, even though she obviously is kind of not necessarily taking him seriously to that point, she hasn't, at least for the film's purposes, dated anybody else in between that time.
No, not that we know. I mean, my stance on it was that, she was in New York, she was taken out by lots of very kind of proper guys, and had sort of acceptable but probably uninteresting dates. That's where I'd sort of placed her. And I sort of imagined her talking to the other people at the radio station saying, there's this crazy guy in Montreal who, ran out of his own wedding and asked me to go to Rome with him and is now sending me roses, And I imagined other girls in the office saying, just go for lunch with him. What's the problem? What's your problem? How much damage can it do? And I think probably it was after some, other sort of proper and uninteresting date that she decided to, have a go and go for lunch. And it's obvious, she had her hair done. In the book, it comes out, a long time later. But she says to him, "You have no idea how much I wanted that lunch. I made a special effort. I bought a new dress and you never commented on it once." So she went and made a bit of an effort.
Well, you talked about the prosthetic test. How important is that transformational aspect in terms of sort of being able to put yourself in the place of the character at different stages in her life?
I think it's so important. It's important that if you're going to play a character with conviction, you have to believe in yourself, right? You have to believe that you are the character. The crap work starts happening when you don't know who you are, and you're just faking it. And so it does help to be able to look in the mirror and see someone who is not you. See an older person, and then it's not just through the makeup. It's through your body posture. It's through where you center your weight. It's through the way you set your face. It's all kinds of things. But I think you feel like someone else. That adds an extra layer on your face that you're wearing. And I think it was brilliant, his work, Adrian Moreau's work. It's so subtle compared to what we've often seen on film, but it still added an actual weight that you could feel. So your face did feel like it was heavier, and your neck felt different. Your hands, you look down, if you're playing with your hands as you're sitting doing a dinner scene, and they're old hands. It's it all helps. I mean, Paul and I both felt that. I know we did do a lot ourselves, mentally, but I think it's a support, tremendous support.
Absolutely. Well, in the last couple of roles that you've had, it's been really interesting because you've been in roles that could sort of superficially be seen almost as ornamental to, say, the male characters in the movie. I mean, and Education, even Made in Dagenham, but certainly all three of those characters, including this one, have been really empowered and multidimensional and really interesting. Has it been a matter of being like fortunate enough to find those roles that are already that way, or do you have to do a lot of work to sort of develop a character to make her, I guess, equal to some of the male characters, because so many movies do focus on the male characters and make.
Well, I mean, Made in Dagenham though and An Education were female-centric movies. I mean, they both had female lead characters, so they're slightly different, aren't they? But a character like Helen in An Education that you mentioned, my agents weren't particularly interested in me doing that. They said, she's hardly got any lines, and I said, yeah, but I think what she's got is really interesting. So it's clear that lots of people didn't see it on the page.
Yeah.
But I didn't have to add anything. I didn't add any lines to Helen. I just saw this creature that I felt was, multi-dimensional. I made a whole life for her. I found out where she was born. I imagined her sort of jewellery shop where she worked for her dad, and the kind of rich guys would come in, and she'd flirt with them from a really young age and watch what they were doing and watch how they bought, where they were buying for their mistresses or their wives and all this stuff, and she'd watch and she'd learn the game, and she knows she's not going to get there by brains, by having intelligence, so she knows what her assets are and she uses them and flaunts them.
Mm-hmm.
But underneath, I think she knows that it's not going to last, but she's going to be optimistic, relentlessly optimistic until her luck changes, right?
Yeah.
So I'm sure that the Dominic Cooper's character Danny is not going to stick with Helen forever, but she's just along for the ride as long as it lasts. In the moments of sadness you see, I think are her, the thing that she fights. She doesn't let that in very often. I'm not saying that she has a front, but I'm just saying she kind of is a realist, I think, and knows, which side her bread's buttered, and she's going to enjoy it and then pick herself up when it doesn't work out.
Well, I think
that's what I saw when I read those lines. Other people didn't see that. Other people probably saw something else, or a boring character, or whatever they saw. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, so I just sort of further along those lines. So when your agents brought you that character, it was not as interesting, and you brought all those aspects to it, or I guess in general, are you adding to do that?
No,
you think it was there?
The lines, we didn't add any lines to Helen.
Mm-hmm.
The character, as I played it, was the character that was written. But I suppose I don't know. I have no idea the answer really. But that's the character I saw when I read it. But it depends. It's like reading a novel, isn't it? Who do you imagine in your head when you read it? Which is the character that speaks to you, because you identify with a part of it, or you flesh it out. So everyone fleshes it out differently. It's a compliment you've just given me. Thank you for saying that you thought it was maybe more interesting than it might have been. But who knows? Who knows? Once it's done, once it's on screen, you don't know what anyone else would have done with it.
Yeah.
That's the sort of beauty of it, I suppose.
Well, is it a challenge for you as an actress to find roles that?
Yeah, Miriam was a plum role. Miriam was compared to Helen, Miriam was incredibly rich on the page.
Mm-hmm.
Loads of actresses were chasing the part of Miriam. I don't think probably many people were chasing the part of Helen, but I felt I had a secret about Helen,
Mm-hmm.
And the same thing with the Maid in Dagenham part. I read that one speech, and I said, I have to play this. This is a turning point of this movie. This is what turns it from a struggle between just a working class struggle movie into a struggle between all women. And this is the sort of glue that sort of binds women all over the place together. And that scene is the one, and it's turned out to be so, right? People really respond to that scene, and I just thought the way this is written, this is the way people talk, and this is the way people think, and I want to say that bit,
Yeah.
And sometimes that's all you need. I'll do a film for one speech that I fall in love with,
Mm-hmm.
But Miriam, as I say, was a much, was much bigger and richer all round, really.